Thank you. Thank you. How you doing? Good time. How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? Sure. How's it going?
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Harvard School of Public Health and the inaugural event for its Office of Diversity. We are so pleased that you have joined us for this celebration. I am Deborah Prothrow-Stith, and I serve in a newly created position as Associate Dean for Diversity here, and I have the honor of creating and starting the Office of Diversity here at the Harvard School of Public Health. Our mission and intent is on the back of your programs. Please be in touch with us if you have comments or suggestions. I really want to thank our deans, Bloom and Ware, for this very special opportunity to provide resources and structure for this important issue here at the Harvard School of Public Health. I want to thank our office, the staff, and in particular Megan Lloyd for all her work on this event. I want to thank Geraldo Rivera and Erica Rivera for joining us today and making it the special event that it is. And at this moment, I'm turning the program over to our moderator for the afternoon, my colleague, Dr. Brian Gibbs. He received his PhD from the Heller School at Brandeis. And here at the Harvard School of Public Health, he leads the program to eliminate health disparities. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. And I'd like for all of us to congratulate Deborah on her appointment as the Dean of the Office of Diversity. We're in for a treat, and I want to get us started. Let me introduce our keynote presenter, an award-winning journalist with over 35 years experience, who really needs no introduction. He is currently host of Geraldo at Large on Fox News Channel, which is a nationally syndicated program. He has covered Afghanistan and Operation Enduring Freedom, Bethlehem and Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the violent coup in Chile, covered Yom Kippur War, the civil wars in Guatemala, the Philippines and Nicaragua, and Colombia. He's covered ethnic conflicts in Lebanon between 1980 and 83, and Croatia, Bosnia, and Kosovo in 1998 and 1999. More recently, he's covered the collapse of the Minneapolis Bridge, the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and covered the Iraqi elections from Baghdad. He has received more than 170 awards for his journalism, including the 2000 Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award, which was his third, for his NBC News documentary on women in prison, the Scripps Howard Foundation National Journalism Award for Back to Bedlam, the George Foster Peabody Award, 3 national Emmys, 7 local Emmys, 2 Columbia DuPont, and 2 additional Scripps Howard Journalism Awards. Mr. Rivera is a graduate of the University of Arizona and Brooklyn Law School and is the author of 7 books, including the most recent, His Panic. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Geraldo.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Very exciting. I already had an argument with Senator Sanchez in the green room there, so there we go. You know why? Because I'm very gloomy. I'm very pessimistic. I think we're at a terrible time in our national history right now as it affects the Latino population. You know, in the last couple of days, there have been more raids on the meatpacking plants in Iowa and the Midwest. This is the latest in a series that began after comprehensive immigration reform failed in June of 2007. And let me tell you about one day's raid specifically. The day the Holy Father, Pope Benedict XVI, came to Washington, it was a Wednesday. He met with President George W. Bush, and in their capacities as mutual heads of state, this is just 2-3 weeks ago, they signed, I was going to say an encyclical, but basically a treaty between the Vatican and the United States that said that they would mutually recognize the rights of immigrants. It was a beautiful rose garden ceremony. We covered it on Fox and the other networks. And George W. Bush, his for whatever other failings he has had, he has been a champion of comprehensive immigration reform. So it was a wonderful moment in an otherwise troubled time. That same day, in 6 Pilgrim's Pride poultry processing plants across this nation, hundreds of SWAT-armored ICE agents, Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents, smashed into the poultry processing plants and arrested hundreds of undocumented workers. The very same day the President of the United States was with Pope Benedict XVI, looked him in the eye, signed the treaty, his Homeland Security Administration was unleashing the ICE agents on the poultry processing workers, the vast majority of whom are illegal workers. The same day. What did this event, aside from the insult to the pontiff, what did this event yield to the rest of us, American citizens, our country? What did arresting these hundreds of hard-working, otherwise law-abiding workers in the poultry processing plant, what did it yield to this country? More than 200 agents were involved. They said it was 2 years in the planning, that they didn't intentionally schedule it on the very day the Pope and the President would be signing this document, that they had been investigating it tirelessly. 2 years. It took them 2 years to figure out that undocumented workers are the majority of the workers in the poultry processing industry. They should have seen my NBC Dateline documentary in 1999 on that topic. A Boy Scout could have determined that they were all illegal in 15 minutes. So they had a 2-year investigation. They squandered millions of American federal dollars. They arrested hardworking, mostly men in this plant, and separated them from their families living in Iowa and the other communities in which these plants were located. Now they're charged not only with unlawful entry, which is the low-level federal misdemeanor that all people here illegally are presumably guilty of, but also false documentation. Having Social Security numbers that either did not belong to them or were falsely created, accounts that were made up because the employer, to cover their own behinds, demand some documentation, however lame or transparent. So not only did we spend millions of dollars to plan this coordinated raid that arrested law-abiding people and separated them from their families, but we also put the poultry processing plants, at least temporarily, out of business. They are closed. You know what that means to the price of chicken? I mean, you don't need to go far beyond Economics 101 to realize what happens. And what about that crime of falsely using someone else's Social Security number or a fraudulently created Social Security number? Do you know that those workers and other undocumented immigrants who use fake Social Security numbers get the Social Security deduction, that payroll tax taken out of their salaries every week, just like you do? They are paying, by the latest estimate, $7 billion into the Social Security Trust Fund every year. $7 billion that they have no hope of ever redeeming. So not only did we squander millions, not only did we terrorize hundreds of otherwise law-abiding innocent families, not only did we strip those families of their fathers and leave the mothers and children, many of the children born in the United States and therefore constitutionally citizens, not only did we traumatize them, but we also closed the poultry plant. We increase or decrease the supply of available food to our people, and we are denying the federal treasury and the beleaguered Social Security Trust Fund of the money those men were paying in with no hope of redemption. That's why I'm gloomy. I'm gloomy because there is, as we stand here or sit here today, no realistic chance of comprehensive immigration reform. That's why I'm gloomy. I'm gloomy because every night on cable news and talk radio, the Latino people specifically are being subjected to the most savage propaganda campaign in the history of this country. More savage than the one that metastasized Bill Clinton's blowjob lies into an impeachment. You cannot watch Lou Dobbs on CNN without him putting on a story about how illegal immigrants are ruining our country, how they're devastating our economy, how they're causing crime to be rampant, how they are importing terror and disease. Every single night, I swear to God, you go there tonight, there's been no news peg about illegal immigration today, right? Unless you're going to somehow take Senator Ted Kennedy's sainted efforts on the behalf of these migrants and somehow, but you know what Lou does? He'd do that, Ted Kennedy, and then make it into a show of how these people are wrecking the country. And the senator was misguided in his efforts. You cannot watch that program. I remember clearly in the fourth quarter of 2007, when FBI Director Robert Mueller held a briefing at the Justice Department to report the alarming spike in violent crime. On Lou Dobbs' program that night, and I happened to watch Mueller's presentation live. That night on Lou Dobbs' program on CNN, the story was spike in violent urban crime caused by illegal immigration. I watched FBI Director Mueller never mention immigration in that briefing. And indeed, the spike in violent crime came in cities like St. Louis, Detroit, Cleveland, Philadelphia, all cities with no meaningful recent immigration. Immigrants go where the jobs are. They're not going to those post-industrial depressed cities. They're going to the Sun Belt. They're going to the cities that are thriving. The false link was made then that immigrants cause crime. And you know a story that was never reported on Lou Dobbs or Sean Hannity or Bill O'Reilly or Michael Savage's radio program or Rush Limbaugh's radio program? 2 months ago, the Public Policy Institute of California did a survey of Mexican immigrants between the ages of 18 and 25, the age most likely to commit crimes. The PPI of California found that they were 8 times less likely than citizens to commit crimes. Do you think that you will ever hear that story on any of the programs I have just mentioned? We are being inundated with a wave of propaganda that is having an effect of not just causing the illegal population to go deeper into the shadows. It is affecting the Latino population in this country generally. I told this story earlier. Let me tell it again. I'm on live radio, Fox Live Radio. I do a spot every Friday, 9:30. A month ago, as I'm live on the radio, I get a call from a guy named Sergio who lives in Portland, Oregon. Mexican-American, father came here illegally, worked, got a green card. Sergio became a citizen. His 5-year-old and 7-year-old sons, both citizen-born, come home crying one day from school. Sergio looks at his kids, his beloved sons, and says, "What's the matter, boys? Why? Why are you crying?" The 7-year-old, the second grader, tells Dad, "Dad, they're calling us a name in school. They're calling us border jumpers." Border jumpers. Citizen children. This is an example of the climate of hatred that has caused the hate crimes in this country against Latinos to spike by 23% in the last year. Another statistic you'll never hear on any of the programs I just mentioned. I ran into your former governor, or those of you from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, in December of 2007, before the Iowa caucuses at Fox News. I did my weekly sparring match with Bill O'Reilly, my joust with Bill O'Reilly. I finished my segment. I came walking out, went to the green room, and there was Mitt Romney, who Erica and I had met at the White House Correspondents' Dinner earlier, and I had interviewed him previously in his incarnation as governor before he became someone that I did not recognize. I said to Governor Romney there, I'm glad that we're seeing each other today because I have to tell you that your rhetoric on the issue of immigration is so extreme, it's causing great concern in the Latino community. In jurisdictions where the police are empowered to enforce federal immigration legislation, Hispanics report to me that they are being stopped and carded. Let me see your proof. Where were you born? Puerto Rico? Prove it. Okay. Dominican Republic? Wait a second. You legal? You're Mexican? That is happening. I said, Governor, this is going to cost you in Florida. Remember, it's December. It's pre-Iowa. Romney's the odds-on favorite to be the Republican nominee, assuming a position that is the most conservative in the Republican field, aside from the total extremist Duncan Hunter, the congressman, or Tom Tancredo. Romney, mainstream guy, extremist rhetoric on the issue of immigration, arguing with Giuliani, who was more liberal, who created a sanctuary city, a sanctuary, state house, this crap and that. And it really, and I said, Governor, you are going to pay the price in Florida. He said, Geraldo, you're wrong. I have 45 Hispanics on my advisory committee in Florida. I said, Governor, mark my words, it's not going to be enough. Your extremism on this issue hangs like a putrid fog, and that's the words I used, and that's the word I will always remember, like a putrid fog over the entire Latino community. It is affecting all of us, citizen-born and immigrant, legal and illegal alike. We agreed to disagree. I left the building. He went on. Florida happened, and guess what? Mitt Romney went to Florida and spent a fortune. He spent tens of millions of dollars on his campaign nationally and poured millions of dollars into the Sunshine State. He especially appealed to the Cuban population, the most conservative Republican voting bloc in this country, without a doubt. He drank the café con leche. He wore the Guayabera shirt. He said, Cuba sí, Castro no. He did everything that Ronald Reagan's playbook said to do, and guess what? The Cubans voted for John McCain 5-1. And that's why you don't have a conservative running on the GOP ticket. Because you can only push us so far. Those Cubans were mostly citizens. But what they were reacting to was what I am describing here. I've been in public life for almost 40 years. I have never, in my career, received more racially tinged audience email or letters than I do now because of my position on this issue. Never. 40 years I've been around. I'm as familiar as an old shoe. How many times people come up to me, oh, you broke your nose with the skinheads, oh, you opened Al Capone's vaults. Oh, I've been around long. People know me better than they know some of their neighbors. And yet the language that I am receiving because of this issue, when I report to you, it is because working at Fox News particularly, and having my point of view, I am uniquely positioned to, when I tell you that this wave of hatred exists, that this putrid fog exists, I am not opining that, I am reporting that. That's the way it is now in this country. Now let's take the issues. Let's take the economy. The drain, the so-called drain that the immigrant community places on the American economy. I already explained the Social Security Trust Fund and the $7 billion annually that gets paid into the Social Security Trust Fund. Every economist surveyed, with the exception of the Heritage Foundation and the Rector Report, and Borjas, the guy that you've got right here at Harvard, every other economist in this country says that immigrants, even in the first generation, over the long term, are a net positive to the economy. The first generation contributing $80,000 per head, and that increasing as their children become more educated and more assimilated. That's the fact as presented by President Bush's Council on Economic Advisors. That's the facts as presented by every objective researcher, with the exception of the two that I've cited here. And yet, what's the impression when you see these programs night after night? That Mr. and Mrs. America are paying for these illegal aliens. What is it about illegal that you don't get, Geraldo? How many times have I heard that? And you know the people, before I get back, that's the economy. Before I get back to that, you know the people who are most vociferous, most vehement in their opposition to immigrants? They're people who never met one, never saw one, never had anything to do with one. I guarantee you they're monolingual, many of them from Midwestern states that have no meaningful Hispanic population, certainly no immigrants. And yet, they watch Lou Dobbs and their lips move along with him. And who is Lou Dobbs? Lou Dobbs was a credentialed business correspondent. He went off, did something else. He came back. He was unsuccessful at CNN his second time around. He has resurrected a failed career on the backs of these poor people. He does it because they all know now how to fix a program that has ailing ratings. You bash an illegal immigrant, you tell every anecdotal story of an illegal doing something antisocial, you highlight it. You never tell the story of the illegal who helps the old lady across the street, or raises their children to be good citizens, or pays his taxes. That's not the story you'll ever hear. You'll hear the story that exacerbates the tensions that exist, that makes more miserable the fate of the 12 million at least who are here. That's the economy. Crime. I talked about the 8 times less likely. That survey by the PPI corroborates every meaningful study done on immigrants and crime since the beginning of the 20th century. Every one. Immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than citizens. That's an established fact. Nobody can deny that based on the empirical evidence. Nobody. Terror. That's why we need the wall. The terrorists. Abdul sneaking in disguised as Paco. We've got to protect the nation. I was on that same Fox News program I described, that Friday 9:30 appearance, different day. This is June 2007, just before the collapse of the comprehensive immigration reform. I get Secretary Chertoff on the phone, live. I asked him, Mr. Secretary, has there ever in the history of the United States, this is live radio, been an example of a terrorist sneaking over the southern border? Thank you. Ever? No. Mr. Secretary, let me ask that a different way. Are you sure there has never been a verified terrorist penetration across the southern border? No. 3 times I asked him, 3 times he told me no. And what's the impression that you have watching these programs? The wall is necessary because our security, our very security, our life and death is at stake. People on the other side of this issue say, wait a second, Geraldo, what about the Fort Dix 6? You've heard about the Fort Dix 6. 3 of the Fort Dix 6 came across the southern border. This is a half a dozen young Muslims who were allegedly plotting to assassinate GIs at the sprawling Army base in Fort Dix, New Jersey. 6 of them busted about a year ago. 3 of them came across the southern border. Jim Pinkerton wrote about it in Newsday. Everybody wrote about it. Big story, except for one detail left out. The 3 young men who came across the southern border came across at the age of 2, 3, and 5. Did they learn their extremist ways in an Islamic preschool? Another example, a brutal triple homicide in Newark, New Jersey. 3 African-American youngsters, 2 of whom attended Delaware State, 1 of whom had just graduated high school and was heading to Delaware State, brutally assassinated in Newark, New Jersey. The 61st, 62nd, and 63rd homicides in that poor city this year. 3 of them killed. Happened Saturday night. Saturday night, I went on the air, my Geraldo at Large show, which I hope you're watching 8 o'clock Eastern Time, Fox News show. And I tell the story. Isn't this awful? 3 youngsters on the cusp of life, everything to live for, brutally assassinated in the athletic field behind a high school in Newark. No other program on cable news picked up that story that night. Sunday. It's always a slow news day. Triple homicide, Newark, New Jersey. Nobody covered it. Nobody. Monday, one show. I monitored. One show. Not CNN, not MSNBC. One show on Fox, John Gibson's show, 5 o'clock Eastern at that time. He covered it. Tuesday, nothing. Wednesday, the news breaks that one of the 5 alleged perpetrators was here illegally from Peru. One of the 5 here illegally from Peru. Wednesday. By Thursday, it was the biggest story in this country. Everybody was reporting illegal alien snuffs out 3 lives that had enormous promise and would have brought great things back to their families and their community. It was a big story. Everybody doing it on the 24-hour news cycle of cable. Talk radio was abuzz with the story of the illegal alien who brutally snuffed out the lives of these 3 people. So suddenly the deaths had meaning. Suddenly the murders were relevant and newsworthy. It wasn't an example of black-on-black crime. Ooh, yeah, black-on-black crime. I did that story last week. But now it's an illegal alien killing 3 American youngsters on the cusp of life. Now it's the biggest story in cable news. One of the 5 perpetrators came illegally at the age of 11. Nobody reported that. I argued with Tom Tancredo on Sean Hannity's program and debated and pointed out that fact. Sean Hannity says, Geraldo, what you don't get is that the American people are angry. I understand that anger. I understand your anger, because I understand that most people disagree with me on this issue. But that anger is not fact-based. It is based on the most odious wave of propaganda that has befallen us since World War II. And talking about World War II, let me talk about the other issue. Let me say, I did terror, did the economy, I did crime, disease. All right, I'll get to disease. Let me talk about this other issue, language. How Samuel Huntington, the political scientist, and others, he wrote Clash of Civilizations and Who Are We? The Who Are We was, I quote him in the book, he says, the most exceptional threat to America's traditional identity is this unprecedented wave, this extraordinary wave of immigration from Mexico. The most profound threat to America's traditional identity. Who are we is the title of the essay. What is exactly America's traditional identity? Is there anybody who believes that, as described by Samuel Huntington, the traditional identity of the United States is the Pilgrims, the Anglos who founded the country? That's what he means by who are we. He doesn't mean who are me, Geraldo. He means who are we, Samuel, and the other people that hang out with Samuel. I understand that fear. That was the fear, that America is changing in some fundamentally irreversible and profound way. That's what's behind the propaganda. That's what's behind Samuel Huntington's Who Are We fear. The country is definitely changing demographically. It is an irresistible, irreversible trend in this country. The country is getting darker. That's a fact of life. Latinos, not better, not worse, darker. I told Bill O'Reilly when the statistics came out, I said, dude, the country's going to look more like me than it looks like you, but that's not a bad thing, necessarily. There were 4 million Hispanics in this country in 1950. 4 million. Now there are 45 million. That demographic change is affecting the way people feel about this issue. What people fail to grasp is the vast majority of that exponential population growth is not based on immigration. Rather, it is the people born here, having children, settling, and then you know how that goes. My dad was one of 17. I only have 5. My kids will have 2 or 3 each. That's just the way it is with immigrants. But that change, the fact that people can hear Spanish language being spoken, or that if you can hit 2 when you dial 411 and get a Spanish voice, or you can get a ballot printed in Spanish, that assails some people. That affects some people in a very negative way. They say, wait a second, like Newt Gingrich and the English-only people. Isn't the English language, the glue that cements this disparate nation? Isn't it what defines us as a nation in many ways? Isn't Spanish a threat to that? Yes, 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 no. Spanish is no threat. I know thousands of immigrant families I do not know. And if there's anybody in this room who does, stand up and be counted. I do not know a single immigrant child born in this country who does not speak English. In every one of these Hispanic families. Every survey indicates that Latino immigrants are learning English at a faster rate than previous groups. When you go to a Cuban family and they're home and they're watching a telenovela or they're watching Sábado Gigante and eating arroz con pollo or habichuela or something like that, they go out and they have McDonald's. Then they listen to Britney Spears or one of the Miley Cyrus and all this other stuff. I mean, we are just like the groups that came before us, and what I fear with this whole Spanish language phobia is that, let me give you an example of what happened to Italian. Italian was the second most common language spoken in the United States. Why? Because you had this tremendous Italian immigration during the Ellis Island period prior to 1924 and the National Origins Act. But from the turn of the century to 1924, you had millions of Italians coming here. You had the creation in Boston and elsewhere of little Italies. Italian very commonly heard on the streets. Very much, a vibrant and living language. The Mamma Mia stereotype became so endearing to so many, and fostered a real familial and simpatico relationship with the Italians. And then World War II happened, and Italy was on the wrong side in World War II. So they had signs that were commonly posted everywhere. Don't speak the enemy's language. Don't speak the enemy's language, from 1941. Italian as a spoken language on the streets of the cities of America disappeared almost overnight. The Italian-American social clubs and all of the rest of the things that were the nucleus of those little Italy communities disappeared overnight. Italian became almost an archaic language spoken in whispers in homes. Don't speak the enemy's language. Jump cut from 1941 to 2007, 2008, Joey Vento in Philadelphia. The son of, or grandson of Italian immigrants. Joey Vento with the Philadelphia cheesesteak, an icon in the city of brotherly love, posts a sign that says, "This is America, order in English." Isn't that, like English only, the same as the sign that said, "Don't speak the enemy's language"? Isn't that, in essence, what he's saying? Joey Vento and Newt Gingrich and the others who have this incredible fear of Spanish and the spread of Spanish? And this is my main point, don't be fooled by the stereotype. I mean, you're in this building, and I understand that to a large extent I'm lecturing to the choir here. I get that, and I beg your indulgence. I understand that you understand the difference between fact and bullshit. But there is an awful lot of that out there, and it is affecting us in the real world in real time. What I call on President George W. Bush to do, after the November election, he's a good-hearted man who has screwed up a lot of things royally. But on immigration, because he was a border state governor, and he understood the unique relationship between Mexico specifically and Latin America generally and the United States. He understood that Texas and New Mexico and Arizona and California and Oregon and Nevada and Utah and parts of Kansas used to belong to the people now being accused of trespassing, to their grandfathers and their great-grandfathers and their great-great-grandfathers. He got it. He and Vicente Fox were on the verge of nationalizing or internationalizing the trans-border workforce. that had come at the whim and demands in the United States like a tide, ebbing, flowing, ebbing, flowing. World War II happens, the GIs go to fight in Europe. Come on, Mexicans, we need you. The GIs come back, the Depression hits, Mexicans get out of here. Even citizens of Mexican descent deported from the United States. World War II happens, the GIs go abroad, Mexicans come back. World War II ends, the Korean War, and that's the way it went. That's the way it went. And Bush got it, Vicente Fox got it. They were on the verge of, remember, NAFTA now is law, passed during the Clinton administration, of going the next logical step. Internationalizing a transborder workforce who could easily come and go as demand warranted. 9/11 happens. What does the United States do? We did as we always do when confronted with an external threat, we hunkered down. That's where the thoughts of walls and the rest of it come. When confronted from abroad, always put up the fortress. Here we are. We're going to defend our nation. The fact that no terrorist has ever come from Mexico, all that stuff became irrelevant. That's where the hammer fell. You know, the president can go to Saudi Arabia and hang out and hold the king's hand every 2 or 3 days, despite the fact that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi Arabian. None were Mexican, as far as I know. No, they didn't take a lowrider into the World Trade Center. And yet that's where the hammer fell. That's where the vast expenditure of Homeland Security resources is going. We're building a wall to keep out the continent that, since the Monroe Doctrine at least, we have sought to hold close to us. We have yielded to Hugo Chavez and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad the influence in Latin America and built the wall and said, see, the gringos hate us. Logic would have dictated they build the wall with Canada. That's where 20 penetrations have come. The most recent, the bicycle bomber in Times Square, part of a group of 4 illegals coming across from Buffalo, non-Hispanic, I would assume. I don't know for sure, but I doubt if they hitchhiked around. But instead, this hammer falls on the southern border. The 12 million who are here are trapped here in many ways. The old ebb and flow, the old decades-long, generational-long policy of the twin promises, the lax enforcement on the one hand and a job on the other. Suddenly, the fabric is disrupted, breaking down. They're stranded here. What the hell are we going to do about them? You're not going to deport them. You're not going to round them up and put them in cattle cars. Evoking an era, a horrible era from other nations in worse times than this. They're here. They're here for various and sundry reasons. I want President Bush, after the November election, so he doesn't doom his candidate, because I believe that the feelings are so raw that an activist immigration person would not be elected president. Luckily, we have 3 candidates who are all on the right side of the issue. But let President Bush wait until he's truly a lame duck. And whoever wins in November, from November to January, what is it, 22nd, 21st, whenever the presidential inauguration is, between that period, between that first Tuesday in November and the January inauguration, he's still president. I want President Bush to issue a presidential pardon to all 12 million who are here, whose only crime is unlawful entry, or the documentation associated with it. He has the constitutional power to do that. And he doesn't even have to do it. He has to threaten it to get Congress off the dime, to get them moving again. He can, by doing that, say, I want border security too. We all do. I want border security too. You need, in a sovereign nation, you got to know who's here. You have enough inventory of your people. Let the 12 million come out of the shadows. Let's photograph them, take their fingerprints, do a criminal background check on these people, and if indeed their only crime is that they're here unlawfully, give them a visa. I'm not even saying that the president should, and giving them a pardon, say that they are on a path to citizenship. Let the legislature, let the people of the United States work that out, but get these people out of the shadows. Get them in a place where they do not live in the terror of the people who work in those meat processing plants or those poultry processing plants, fearful, or the New Bedford knapsack manufacturer, where they separated nursing mothers from their children, took fathers in the dark of night, separated them from their families. wrenching apart the values that they profess to hold dear, these federal authorities. That has to end. We cannot live with that terror. And Hispanic leaders, Hispanic legislators, what is your role? What is your duty now? It's to recognize the reality that in too many ways we have been complacent. In too many ways we have been self-congratulatory. In too many ways we have said, we'll get to it. We're not going to get to it unless we get to it, and we're not going to get to it as long as we are silent, and as long as we don't register, as long as we don't vote, as long as we allow people like Tancredo and Hunter and Dobbs and the others to set the agenda. This climate that I describe, that I report to you, is the worst climate since the days that my dad came here from Puerto Rico. In 1937, in the middle of the Great Depression, he came, the valedictorian of his high school class, perfectly fluent in English. He came and he found 50,000 Puerto Ricans here. But Dad, I thought there were 250,000 Puerto Ricans here after World War I. There were, but they faced the same kind of discrimination and resentment and bitterness during the times of economic turmoil that I'm describing nowadays. And so the population that was over 200,000 shrunk to 50,000. Now it has built again, and now there are over 900,000 Puerto Ricans in New York. There are, more Puerto Ricans in the States than there are on the island of Puerto Rico. But that discrimination that he encountered, that racism, dare I say it, that he encountered, is something that is very real now. And Latinos who separate themselves, I'm a Caribbean Latino, I'm a Dominican, I'm a Puerto Rican, I'm an Argentinian, I'm a Mexican, your Mexican issues don't apply to me. I want that to be a thing of the past. I want brown to be the new black. This is what I mean by that. African Americans have historically segregated amongst themselves based on their skin color. They, for various historic reasons, had a pecking order within the black race. And there was no community of interest. And then in the 60s, they came up with black as a unifying description. It didn't describe literally a person's skin necessarily. White, tan, medium brown, black. It was a corporate identity that described everyone. I want Latinos to incorporate, to have that same corporate transnational identity. I want us to all be in this together. And the way I think we can do that is to adopt brown as the way we describe ourselves. Forget the silly argument of a Latino, Hispanic, a Chicano, who's this, who's that. We're all in this together. We're all brown, citizen, non-citizen. We have a community of interests, and we have to work together. We can affect the presidential race, but I don't think it is as relevant as the state, the Senate races, the congressional races, and the municipal elections. That's where we can really bring to bear the potential energy that we have in this demographic phenomenon that's happening right now. But unless we stand up and recognize that we can't be self-congratulatory, we're falling behind in education, we're falling behind in too many objective indicators, we have to take responsibility for ourselves. It's not necessarily all the man's fault. We take that self-responsibility, we accept this transnational corporate identity, we lobby, we work, we vote, we work hard to change what is a distressing time right now in Latin American history. It is now my life's work. It is, at this stage of my career, after 40 years, what I will devote the rest of my career to. In the way that I've spent much of the last 4 decades with the developmentally disabled, and I'll still maintain that near and dear to me, I'm going to speak out. And I'm going to call a liar a liar. And when I see something on the TV, and I'm asking every Latino elected official or appointed official or lobbying group to point out to the FCC and others that this misrepresentation, this hysterical misrepresentation is having a real-world, real-time negative impact on a whole race of people, and they have to have the same rules as they do with any other group in their reporting. They can't misreport. They can't lie. They can't blame the Mexicans for bringing leprosy into the country when it's a false assertion. All we want, just very briefly, and I'm going to wrap this up. On the issue of what is it, Geraldo, about illegal that you don't get? I'm the descendant of immigrants. My people came here legally. God bless them. They came here legally. But guess what? There were no meaningful immigration laws in the middle of the 19th century. If you didn't have an infectious disease, if you weren't an anarchist or a prostitute or a known criminal, you were allowed into this country. 650,000 Irish came in a single year, 2 million within a historic heartbeat. Ironically, at the same time we were taking the Southwest from Mexico, the country, these cities, Boston, New York, Savannah, Charleston, were changing their ethnic makeup with this extraordinary wave of immigration, but there were no laws against them coming. The first immigration statute we ever had was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, where they made it a law that the Chinese were not allowed legally to immigrate here. Then when they created Ellis Island a couple of years later, and they opened up this marvelous experiment, no Africans were allowed through Ellis Island. No Asians were allowed through Ellis Island. No Latinos were allowed through Ellis Island. Ellis Island was, come on, you're hungry, you're tired, you're huddled masses, white people yearning to be free. In 1924, they passed another law. Herbert Hoover engineered it. The National Origins Act. That's the name of it. Look it up. The National Origins Act set visas specifically based on national origin. And Hoover said, we are implementing this law because we can't, he said, as Huntington is saying now, we can't allow the basic character, the fundamental character of the country to change. So under the National Origins Act, look it up, 76% of the visas went to people from the United Kingdom and Scandinavia, 76%. Now, in 1924, the Italians are no longer allowed in with the same ease as the Northern Europeans. The Greeks aren't. Italians only get 3% of the allotted visas. Greeks only get 1.5%. The further east you get in the Mediterranean, the Orthodox people and the Russians and the Eastern Europeans, they're not quite as white as the other ones. They got nothing in terms of the visas that were available to them. And that's the law that existed on our books for the next 40 years until who changed it? Senator Ted Kennedy, God bless him, and made it much more family-oriented or needs-oriented. But when they say to you, my family came here legally, there was never a visa for the Mexicans. There was only the wink and the nod. There was only this informal arrangement. Now there's something like 150,000 visas for Mexicans, of whom there are probably 25 million in this country. They use 150,000 Mexicans just picking avocados. We need a change in immigration. We need reform. We need not a race-based system, but an ethics and historic-based system that's based on family ties, it's based on what this country needs. What made America great? Unique in the family of nations, we harnessed immigrant vigor. It sounds corny. That's what we did. From the four corners of the world, we took this immigrant vigor and we converted it into national energy. We're not like the Arab world where women are not allowed to work and all the rest of it, cutting off half their nose to spite their face. We took them all. Come on, we're here now. We're here now. We can be great. Look what the Asians have done. We can be great as an immigrant nation. We are great. But we can't start separating. And as this immigration debate goes on and this troubling rivalry festers between black and brown, we have to speak to it. We have to motivate our public officials to call the people out who are the propagandists. And we've got to tell our story, tell our immigrant story, step forward. Look at my family. Look at your family. Look at how great. That's all we want, the American dream. Thank you. I couldn't use my notes because I forgot my glasses.
Geraldo, thank you for your historical reflections, the inspirational message, the instruction of where we can be today in creating the vision for tomorrow. Please, once again.
Thank you. Thank you.
We hope to have time for question and answers later in this process, but I want to bring to your attention we have 4 responders who will kick off our discussion, and they will provide comment and then pose a question.
Okay.
Our first responder is Representative Jeffrey Sanchez, who is a veteran community organizer who has a passion for public education, public health, and affordable housing. Jeffrey?
Geraldo, welcome to Boston. We're very happy to have you here. You know, you don't know how proud we feel, and I feel as a Latino, to have you in this city, where we've had our struggles, but our struggles aren't as visible as other cities and other states in this nation. But I feel encapsulate the entire experience that you talk about in your book and your life experience and everything that you've done. The way that you put the book together, I enjoyed how it was organized. It touched my heart. It made me mad. It made me cry. It made me laugh. And I feel very proud of it. The historical perspectives were very meaningful to me as someone who has to carry the debate in a legislature that only has 4 Latinos, 1 Dominican, 3 of Puerto Rican descent, and 1 who's a half Latino like yourself, but she's Irish, half Puerto Rican.
That's a fiery combination.
Oh, you just don't know the half of it. And she's a lesbian, just to mix it up just a little bit more. But
that's,
again,
like I said, a fiery combination.
it was a great. Again, the book was a great experience. I got to come back at you again of what we were talking about in the back. You put it on us as legislators. You put it on us as activists. You were an activist. You are an activist. You've worked on the street. Now you are at a level where you carry a national tone. I haven't been liking what happened last year. Last year for me, and looking at everything that you've done in your life, I thought to myself, how's he going to be doing that? Talking about a woman the way that he did in the Boston Globe, and at the same time taking on Bill O'Reilly in the tone that he did, you have to maintain yourself above the bullshit. And if you don't, we're going to look bad. We're going to have a harder time working our work. We're trying to do it. But the struggles are tough, as you very well know, and I don't have to go into it because you live it. You've gone through it in this great book that you put together. But you gotta watch out. You gotta watch out. When you take O'Reilly, you should do what Phil Donahue did, the other Irish guy. Look at him in the eye, keep on smiling, keep the tone cool. Watch out with what you say with these other folks. I am a total news junkie. I got on my little palm trio here. I hit Drudge Report about 5 times a day because I'm always looking to see what the other side says. Why? Because I want to know. But at the same time, it's so that I can maintain myself.
Do the Huffington Post instead.
So I'm just telling you. Do what you have to do. I don't have a question. I just want to make my comment. I told you to leave me last, and you didn't leave me last, so I'm going to run with the mic. Because you know what? When this university, when I was growing up, right across the tracks, right there, we had to look over, and it was real dark on our side. Okay? So now that I have an opportunity, and I have a fellow Boricua right here, I take advantage of the opportunity. So you'll have to forgive me. You'll have to forgive me. So again, the lot has changed. Again, keep up the great work that you're doing, but just, again, calm the rhetoric down just a little bit so that when I invite you to come here to Mission Hill and Jamaica Plain to talk to Latino young men that are killing each other, this past week we had 3 shootings, 1 young man that died, Another young man that got shot in the ass 4 times. When I come and ask you if you will come out and talk to our Latino kids about what's going on and how they can make a difference in this city, in this nation, that you'll come out and you'll do exactly what you've done with this book, which is spread a positive message about what Latinos are about in this country. Thank you.
A very brief rebuttal. For too long, and remember, I started in 1970, and I started as a community activist in the late 60s, and from 1969 on as co-chairman of the Black and Brown Lawyers Caucus, very much involved representing at that time the Young Lords, which are kind of the Puerto Rican equivalent of the Black Panthers, and really from doing it from the street up, from 111th Street in East Harlem up. But I noticed something distressing to me in recent decades, a kind of self-congratulatory, the process will work itself out. We take it. We don't address how horribly we're failing in educating our youngsters. We don't address how we're going backwards in so many different objective criteria. I'm out of patience with it. I am. I'm not going to be that person who says, "Soy lleno de orgullo" every time there's the desfile, the Puerto Rican Day Parade. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm lleno de orgullo, I'm full of pride. But I'm full of anger also and impatience. And, we have parents that don't stress education enough. We don't have a tradition of education. Herman Badillo, who Senator Sanchez and I know very well, the first elected Puerto Rican congressman, says that in some ways in the field of education we've been on a 500-year siesta. I mentioned the Asian contribution. He was vice chancellor of the City University, our big public institution in New York City. He talks about how the valedictorian is always an Asian kid, and the parents are in the front row. The father looks like he works in the Chinese laundry, and the mother looks like she's working in the Chinese restaurant. The kid's got an advanced degree in physics with a 4.0 or a 5.0 or a 50.0, whatever it is. I want that kid to look like me. That's what I want. And I want to, the reason that Jeremiah Wright bugged me so much is that it's everyone else's fault. Oh, the man gave us AIDS. Oh, the man is, yeah, sure. What about the mother and father? What about what about personal responsibility in the Hispanic community? What about wanting to bootstrap? We called it Operation Bootstrap with Muñoz Marin in Puerto Rico when it became an official commonwealth. Operation Bootstrap. Where's the bootstrapping now? 5, 6 generations of Puerto Ricans in this country addicted to these entitlements keep shrinking, so the lifestyle keeps shrinking. I adopted a class of 8th graders in East Harlem, Rafael Cordero Bilingual School, the worst performing junior high, and I said, if you graduate high school, I'll put you all through college. I was very naive because my problem wasn't once they graduated high school, my problem was to get them through 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. That was the problem against the temptations of the street and drugs and the short money. I just had one graduate from medical school, my last one from that group. She married another doctor, another Puerto Rican doctor, and you know what they did immediately on graduation from the medical school of New Jersey? They created a scholarship for the next kid down. That's what I want. I want some of that Asian DNA.
Our next responder is Dr. Carol Baroque Joseph, who is an expert in linguistics and Haitian studies, and also the president of Mass Bay Community College.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be here today and to hear you, Geraldo, because I was telling him earlier on one of his shows in New York years ago when there was this debate about English only and bilingualism, and it was refreshing to read your book, to see that you have made a change in the need for us to really maintain our identities and our languages, because that is not what is going to make us less American. And so I congratulate you on that. And I want to say that I, too, felt very sad the day that decisions were made to put up a wall between Mexico and the United States. when in fact other countries, were taking walls down. I was in Berlin the year with my daughters that the walls were coming down. And here other places are saying we should, do away with walls, and here we are putting them up. The famous sociolinguist Joshua Fishman talked about the need for us to keep our languages alive. In fact, my field in sociolinguistics, I grew up, in New York City, so I'm quite Latina, even though I was born in Haiti. Muy bilingüe en español también. Así es que, so I know the importance. My kids grew up in my own home speaking Haitian Creole and hearing French because I knew they would learn English when they got to school. And that's the kind of thing that you're saying. So all the people who are worried, about children not being able to learn English, that's not where the problem is. The problem is where we need to have better schools, better teachers, people who will be role models. When Geraldo's talking about he wants some of that DNA, yeah, we want the successful people to be role models so that our children will be able to make it. Language is crucial both to ethnic identity and ethnic culture. And I say if you have a language, keep it. Do not lose it. Because I was always, as an elementary school teacher first of bilingual students in New York City, shocked that we would tell children to do away with their language. Don't speak Spanish, don't speak French, don't speak whatever. And then, 7 years later, they're in junior high school. We're saying now, let's learn Spanish. And then fault them for not knowing how to read it or not knowing how to speak it. And then having the kids to, apologizing, I heard Spanish at home or I heard Haitian Creole at home, but they were ashamed to speak it because in schools they were being called all these names. I think it's time for America to realize that we are a multicultural country, that so many different people have contributed to the wealth that we have here. We go around telling other countries about democracy, and yet where is the democracy in our own home? Okay? That was a question that Duvalier, the dictator in Haiti, actually posed to the United States. You're coming here to my country to tell me how to run my country and to have democracy, and yet what I think I have here that you're calling dictatorship is what you have in your country as a democracy. And there's nothing, that Duvalier would do that I would support, because actually my family suffered an awful lot and fled and left Haiti. I got here when I was 8 years old. But that message, stayed with me. And it's because it pointed out the hypocrisy that very often we live in this country. And I am so glad as a journalist that you are challenging journalists who are lying and putting false stories on TV, because I personally have been the victim of some of that. And so I can relate to where you're coming from. I really compliment you for taking those stands. Thank you for your good work.
Thank you. She's referring to that National Enquirer story that linked her with George Clooney. No, Haitians, I'm glad you mentioned Haitians. I mean, there could not be a more vivid example of the racial nature of immigration policy than the difference between how a Cuban is treated and a Haitian is treated. 50 miles separate Haiti from Cuba. A Cuban lands on the beach, they're in. A Haitian lands on the beach, they're at the processing center to be deported immediately. Even Bill Clinton, sainted Bill Clinton, promised the Haitians during this first election campaign that he was going to change that, and then never got around to it because he didn't want the Haitian people to be so agitated that everyone's going to jump on a rickety boat to come here. That was his excuse for getting hurt. But, the problem is not that Spanish is stubbornly existent in the family. The problem is that the children lose Spanish. Like, my best friend is Cheech Marin, my brown brother, I call him. Cheech from Cheech and Chong. So, like me, Cheech has always been challenged in Spanish. I only learned Spanish when my parents sent me to live with my grandparents the summer I turned 15. But we joke about how unfluent or the lack of fluency that we have. So Cheech wrote a song about it. I'm going to sing here first. Mexican Americans like education, so they go to night school and take Spanish and get a B.
Encore?
It's my greatest hit.
Okay. Our next responder is Ms. Billie Avery, who was a fellow here at the Harvard School of Public Health. She's a winner of the MacArthur Genius Award, a founder of the Black Women's Health Imperative, and founder of the Avery Institute for Social Change.
Well, I am so glad to see you so mad. Because you need to be angry. Because anger is what fuels the passion, and that passion is what translates into building a movement. And what needs to happen is we need conversations. We need to talk about stuff. And I think that even though it's a kind of gloomy time, it also is a good time for opportunity. People are ready to have some hard conversations. Why do you think we're getting such a big turnout at the election? We're going to have a black person or a woman that's going to be the Democratic candidate. And people are wanting to have these conversations. I think what we need to do is we need to take time and do that. There needs to be conversations among Latinos about all of the internalized oppression and all of the stuff that you've got laid in for all of the years. There needs to be conversations definitely among us as black people about how we see each other and how we feel and how we're going to be. And we need to, and there definitely got to be conversation among white people as to the whole deal, how it's all laid in, and that whole fear around the browning of America. It is changing. It's going to happen. And it's just, we need to also, you know, as I keep thinking about, we have so many human rights violations. And human rights need to be here. You know, it's not what these other countries are doing that I'm concerned about. You know, we've been concerned a long time. We remember the lynching, and we remember all of those things that happened to people who are not white in this country. And it's just, you know, we have so much we need to deal with. And if we could get folks thinking about human rights, we got so many issues. We got immigration to deal with. We got health care reform to deal with. We got a lot of stuff. And racism is just worse than ever. I cannot believe some of the quotes, I do believe the emails that you have in your book, some of these mean-spirited, hateful things that people are saying. And we need to figure out how do we point these people out and address that rather than keep it covered over. And I think the time is now. And I like your idea. George Bush needs to redeem himself something big time. He really does. You know, and you present a good opportunity. That's something that could be mobilizing. And I say, don't give up. You know, the whole thing of write-in campaigns, call-in campaigns. You all did some creative organizing that day of all those simultaneous rallies and all this shit. I've been wanting to do something like that ever since. The opportunity just hadn't come yet. But I think we need to use that opportunity. The last thing I want to say, within the reproductive justice movement, we as women of color have come together with white women, and we have a very dynamic coalition that's working together. And there are things that we agree on. Not everybody in it is pro-choice, and we all say we might not all believe in the same thing, but we are all moving in the same direction. And if we can agree on the direction, you know, that'll be a big pull. So I don't really have a question. Just
that's great. Just a very, very brief response. I alluded to the black-brown rift that has never been more clearly apparent as it is right now in the who's voting for Hillary and who's voting for Barack. It's very, very distressing to me. I just want to quickly, why do Latinos have such affection for the Clintons? I mean, it's not just that Bill Clinton had a good personality. Remember, he put Bill Richardson in his cabinet, Federico Pena in his cabinet, Henry Cisneros in his cabinet, practically lived in South Texas and Southern California, really worked the community very hard, you know, became a very familiar presence in the community. So a lot of that loyalty is traditional. And many younger Latinos are attracted to the candidacy of Barack Obama. But there is no doubt, there is increasing tension between the groups, particularly in places like Los Angeles, where the demographic is changing so rapidly, and neighborhoods like they used to call it South Central LA, now they call it just South LA, or the Englewood area, or many of the areas in Near East LA that historically have been African American are now becoming Latino. And there, a gang fight in Montebello High School just 2 days ago. Those of us who, like Al Sharpton's a very good friend of mine. He worked with me on the book. We have to remind people that minorities, and I use this analogy, Al's analogy, Reverend Sharpton's analogy in the classroom we just did. We're like crabs in a basket. Rather than trying to get out of the basket, we're eating each other. And the grand coalition that existed during the days when Harold Washington was mayor of Chicago, David Dinkins in New York, Tom Bradley in Los Angeles, Andrew Young in Atlanta, none of those guys would have been mayors but for the fact that there was a black-brown coalition. That urban coalition, the traditional coalition, has broken down. It's been exacerbated in this presidential race. We have a lot of healing to do. That's why I would like, and this is very controversial, but I can anticipate the hisses. I would like whoever comes in second in the Democratic race to offer the second spot to the other candidate. That, to me, is the easiest way to heal.
Last but not least is our own Dr. Dolores Acevedo Garcia, who is Associate Professor in the Department of Society, Human Development, and Health, and conducts groundbreaking research on racial and ethnic disparities in health and healthcare with a focus on children. Dr. Acevedo Garcia.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Geraldo, for the book. I really enjoy it. I think it's very eloquent. I love how it's written from a personal perspective and at the same time using a lot of data. I have to say I know a lot of the data really well, and I think that we need people like you to talk about the data because we academics are really bad about talking the evidence in a way that is compelling. So thank you for that. It's very enjoyable. I have a comment and also a question. My comment, and I thought very hard about what I could say in a couple of minutes, has to do with how I see that in a very ironic way, Latinos are a very invisible population. So I think the immigration issue is very visible, and you describe very well the outrage, ridiculous outrage about immigration. But I think Latinos as a group that makes a lot of contributions to U.S. society are very invisible. In my work on health disparities and segregation issues, neighborhood segregation, school segregation, I find all the time that my data and the data of other people say that in terms of how bad our neighborhoods and our schools are, we are in a situation that is almost as bad as that of African Americans. And however, when we talk about equity issues in this country or civil rights or desegregation or anything like that, we are largely always implicitly or explicitly talking about black-white issues. We are not talking about Latinos. I also think that in this election, although I recognize that where the Latino vote is going to be has been an issue, we have been largely invisible compared to the white race, white-black race issue that has been so prominent. And I also think that within educational institutions, and I talk to my few Latino students about this all the time, one of the most intractable issues, and I'm still trying to grapple with, is why it's so hard to incorporate Latinos into educational institutions, even harder than to incorporate African Americans. So those are my comments about our invisibility. So I'm grateful that you are making us less invisible. And I also had a question. I found your argument about brownness very compelling, and I've heard that from some other people. On the other hand, I think that Latinos, that we have a lot of assets, and we have many things that make us able to try to break down some of these categories that people in this country have been using have not been so great or so successful because we still have a lot of inequity despite the use of these categories. One of these categories is race. So I'm not sure that we have to be brown. Actually, I think that we Latinos, including myself, when we are asked about our race, we tend to roll our eyes and say, what do you mean? And that's what we mark other race. We do not embrace these categories. And rather than being brown, I think that if we embrace something else, we may be better off. And I also think that the language issue is huge. I think that most of us in our families speak at least 2 languages. And I think that that gives us a lot of flexibility on how we think about issues, and we need to make that part of the dialogue, how we can be multilingual in the sense of using different frameworks to understand the world, and that we need to make that part of the dialogue. And finally, I also think that national origins are important. I totally agree with you in the need to make alliances, but on the other hand, I think that something that is missing in the discussion of immigration issues in the US is that unlike in Europe, we don't think of ourselves as a region. We think of ourselves as a country, but we are in a region that is largely Latino, and we will have to live with this forever. And the demographics of this continent are largely towards more Latino and less of the other stuff. So we need to embrace those strengths. So defy race, defy English language only, defy national boundaries as the way of thinking about issues, I think. And so I wanted to get to your reaction to that. And thank you again for the book.
Thank you. Thank you very much. When my dad, after trying very hard to be invisible, and wanting to be like the Puerto Rican Ozzie and Harriet family and just kind of blend in. When he and I could finally have a dialogue about it, I was much more active, and I grew this mustache in 1968. I haven't shaved it since. You know, I was just the opposite of my dad in terms of ethnic pride and my community activism. But when we finally reconciled on the issue, we used to say to each other that you know, and I was moving out to California. I was a very young man. After 2 years in the Maritime College, I was moving to California, and I was going to be around Mexicans for the first time, and asked him. He had been in the Army and served out in California and had much more experience with Mexicans than I had had at that time. We used to say, La única diferencia entre nosotros los hispanos es el color de nuestros frijoles. The only difference among Spanish people is the color of your beans. When it comes down to it, fundamentally comes down to it. That's why, in my opinion, although I totally respect your point of view, that's why, in my opinion, we need a transnational identity. Because race is such a, we check other. And there's wild differences within the Hispanic community. The American Sociology Association's convention in New York last year, Cubans self-identified as white, 91%. Puerto Ricans, 53%, Mexicans, 49%. The rest, other. Now, you know where Cuba sits. You know how large and varied the population is. And there's the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. There's not that much genetic difference between a Cuban and a Puerto Rican. That's not about DNA. That's about self-identification, and that's about self-perception. It's also about self-esteem in some ways. We have been defeated within our family by racism. Within the Hispanic community, it's the untold story. No activist wants to talk about it, but there's discrimination within the Latin community. I have it in my own family. My dad, one of 17 children. Of the 17, all different hues and colors represented because of the nature of the Puerto Rican stew, historic stew, you know, the Spaniards, and then the African Americans, and then the United States service people, and then all the buccaneers and everything else that's passed through La Isla de Encanto all of these years. You have a real, you know, all things going on. I got my Uncle Juan is very, very dark. I got my Aunt Anna is very light, and everything in between. But race has been a big, big divider in the same way it was among black people until, as I suggest, the civil rights movement and black. That's why I think we need something dramatic, with all due respect. I think that there's too many countries. I understand you have pride in, I mean, you talk to a Puerto Rican. Where are you from? Aguadilla, Salinas, Ponce, Santurce, San Juan. Even among a Puerto Rican, there's got to be some little division, some little subset. That's why I think we need a corporate identity. We need to say that between me and Cheech, even though he's a Mayan, Spaniard or whatever Mexicans are, Aztec, whatever it is, and I'm a Caribbean, this and that we're the same. You know, that was the idea of La Raza before La Raza became like the NAACP, the blood. I really think that if we have that, I'm not saying you flaunt it and you throw it around, just have a uniting element there, just a glue, just a center that we can all rally to and all be in it together. I just think that that's the multiplier. That's where the invisibility that is so much a fact of our life can be overcome. 45 million. Every other teenager in California is a Latino right now, a Hispanic, whatever you, brown kid. That's a reality. The wall's way too late anyway. What's the wall going to do other than just piss people off?
All right. We have time for 2 burning questions, although we are out of time. And in being out of time, I'm going to ask that you come over to this mic and ask the burning question very succinctly. In the meantime, whomever chooses to come over to the mic.
With that kind of daunting preamble.
I'm going to introduce a very special guest that we have, the former ambassador to Tanzania, who served under the Clinton administration, Reverend Charles Stith, who currently is the director of the African President's Archives at Boston University.
I didn't anticipate an introduction. I do have a question.
I'm ready, Charles.
Given this historic election cycle in which we find ourselves, and that this issue of race has been treated on the margins and at the mainstream of this contest, Obama's now famous speech, the call for expanding the conversation on race in this country. A kind of twofold question. Given what you shared in Hispanic and what you've shared today, how would you suggest that we expand this conversation on race to deal with the issues that you've laid out? One, in terms of framework, but then I'm also a very practical guy, and that is, where are some of the places this conversation needs to take place, and who are some of the participants that ought to be involved?
Great question. Very, very briefly, in the historic speech on race, Barack Obama referenced the O.J. Simpson trial, which was kind of like the burlesque manifestation of the race issue in America. Everybody remembers when O.J. Simpson was acquitted. You had the shots of the black colleges and the students going wild and crazy, applause, and then they had the shots of the like Grand Central Terminal, the white people, everybody very gloomy, everybody. There was clearly a racial divide in that, and it was because of the Hollywood trappings of it, a very poor way, but eloquently made of the point that race is still, at its heart, the most important domestic issue that we face. Race defines almost everything. When Barack Obama gets 30% of the vote to Hillary Clinton, 65% of the vote in Kentucky, that tells you something. We are not in the post-racial era. Barack Obama is not a post-racial candidate. Race is, as Cornel West said, he used to be here, right? Until he went to a better draft pick, Princeton. But race matters. It does matter. That's why, as we go forward, not only does Barack Obama have to make himself much more familiar and accessible, and distance himself from some of the language of the of his pastor, which I find very self-defeating. But he also has to be pragmatic about the fact that you're not going to change the Walmart Democrats into suddenly being post-racial or transracial or not racists. You know, it's funny, just very brief. Everyone says, well, how can the Mexicans still think about the Southwest and losing California? That was 1846. 15 years after that, the Civil War. You don't know white people who still, especially Southerners, dream of the July morning in 1863 before Pickett got beaten at Gettysburg. They still dream. Newt Gingrich wrote a whole book about an alternate history if the South had won, the Confederate in the Attic and all those other books. I mean, race is a dominant, it is part of the air we breathe. That's why aside from and Barack Obama is a wonderful candidate, but Barack Obama has to pick a running mate that can calm that fear. And I would hope that John McCain would pick Condoleezza Rice as his running mate to guarantee us that the race issue is muted.
Okay, given that we don't have any additional questions, I want... Oh, okay. Oh, okay, now.
You tried.
Okay, all right. In the meantime, can you escort her over to the microphone?
I can hear you fine. I can hear you fine. I totally support Dr. Cosby's work. I speak about it on the air. It is important. I totally agree with everything that you stated and that he stands for. And he stands in stark contrast to Jeremiah Wright. That's the gulf that exists. They did it to us. We're victims, and it's not our fault. To get over it, cinch up your belt, go out there, take care of your children, make sure they get home at midnight, make sure they stay off drugs, make sure they get a passing grade. You know, we've got to evolve as people. We have to stop. I agree, and it has wonderful opportunity despite the obstacles. And Dr. Cosby's right, and so are you.
Our last question.
Hello. Before I heard you speak, I was thinking about a question for you, and I want to quote you through my question as well. I'm originally from Bogota, Colombia. My husband and I came
estaba
here
allí
in the
muchísimas
20s.
veces.
And I think, wouldn't it be important also to advocate and make the American public aware of why this immigration started in the first place? What is the situation that all these 13 million people faced back in their countries in terms of security, safety, education, and promising future for their own children? Just any welfare, food, and just the regular things that we all can get in this country through hard work are things that are not obtainable there. Now, one of the things that you said through your work, through your speech, was education is not a family tradition for Latinos. But the truth of the matter is, and I can attest, at least from Colombia for sure, I don't have data about other countries, is what is the situation in our countries? Is the likelihood of obtaining an education in our countries a promising future for our children? Most likely not. You know, why do we have drugs? Why do we have such violence? So I think it's important also to bring to the public awareness to the American people, what is the situation in these countries? Why did the immigration happen in the first place? And why are Latino children living in families that have a different culture with respect to education?
You could write a doctoral thesis on that, but it's a very important issue. I just want to remind people, you know, I mentioned the sign, "Don't speak the enemy's language." The other sign, perhaps more relevant to the history of this town, Irish need not apply. You know, there is a maddening tendency to now reference the background of the Latino immigrants and why they come. To, once your group gets over the bridge, to burn the bridge behind you. You know, to not recognize the cyclical nature of immigration, the fact that the Irish were faced with the famine and, you know, the failure of the potato crop and the oppression from the Anglos, and they came for all those various and totally rational, reasonable causes that depopulated entire towns, counties went from, you know, teeming to empty in Ireland in that historic heartbeat. And why did the Germans come? The same reason, the German Catholics particularly, because of discrimination. And the Italians, they came, and mostly the single men came first because there was no work in Sicily or in southern Italy, and then they brought their children, like the wonderfully eloquent lady in the back. Latin America now is faced with enormous turmoil. And what does a wall do to the turmoil of Latin America? Does it in any way mitigate that chaos? Does it in any way say the United States stands ready to help regularize the national destiny of Colombia or whatever your nation is? It does exactly the opposite. It says, we're not interested. That's what it says. And do you think a 25-foot wall is going to stop a hungry Mexican father from... The Mexicans don't have ladders? A 25-foot wall that costs $1 trillion is going to be defeated by a 26-foot ladder that costs $1. And we have to reach out. NAFTA's the right idea, and now all these candidates are running away from it because of the false promise that they're going to bring back $85 an hour automotive jobs in Detroit. That's not happening. That's not happening. It's a global economy. The world is flat. Thomas Friedman, we got to deal with we've got to be efficient. We've got to be effective. We've got to harness this vigor. Immigration is also Darwinian. There's no doubt about it. Now, with all due respect to those of you who are fundamentalists here, it's definitely Darwinian. Who's going to walk 45 miles across the desert and dodge the coyotes, the animal four-legged and the two-legged ones, and the migra and the border patrol and and no water and that harsh dangers? It's Darwinian. The best and the strongest are coming. We want them. You ever see these Guatemalan people that they work the construction jobs yet? Sheesh. You look at them in wonder and say, man, I want to bottle some of that too. But you're right, Latin America is absolutely chaotic in many, many ways. We've had a very negative impact on the domestic policies of many Latin American countries. And my first foreign assignment was the U.S. engineered coup that overthrew Salvador Allende in Chile. Our record is woeful in many ways, and I think the wall is a continuation of that sorry tradition. But I don't want to end on that melancholy note. Let me just end on this note. Am I ending? Yes. Okay. We could work this out. Register, vote, get active, spread the word. I certainly am going to keep trying until they yank me out of that chair at Fox. It's a weird place for me, but that's where I'm staying. Thank you. Thank you.